So I got access to early viewing of the FPS documentary. If you're a fan of FPS games at all, there's likely something in here that'll interest you. It devotes a lot of time to id and Doom, but it covers basically every major shooter from the 90s through to now. Of course, as a Halo fan, it does contain some brand new interview footage from Joe Staten, Marcus Leto, and Jamie Griezmer. It also contains some cool footage from people you'd expect: Tom Hall, John Romero, John Carmack, Cliff Bleszinski, Robin Walker, and John Cook. It's basically what it says on the tin. It's actually very comprehensive on the early years, covering games like Maze Wars, The Colony, Catacomb 3D, Ultima Underworld. It dives into the technology. I think it was actually awesome that they got the creators of Maze Wars on the documentary. It is interesting to me, and it makes a lot of sense, that the first-person shooter basically started off as a bunch of young dudes who are all into one interest in the same location, just goofing off, doing something fun for the sake of it. Literal high schoolers. Time is truly a flat circle. It was certainly interesting in the sections that discuss the technical aspects of the games. It was also fairly easy to follow as a documentary, mostly going in chronological order, except situations where it made more sense to cover like a whole series at once, like Halo. This was largely a well-produced documentary. It's comprehensive, it's good, it's worth watching. It's a bit like well-produced video essays from channels like Ahoy with very slick presentation, with the obvious advantage for this documentary being that it consists largely of interviews with actual developers, and it has a professional presentation. Plus, it's 4.5 hours long, with not really a ton of filler. There were some interesting facts I learned in there for certain, like how the Shadow Warrior and Quake 3 railgun were both independently influenced by Arnold Schwarzenegger's Eraser. There's a quote from one of the creators of Team Fortress about his inability to predict what is fun. He was talking about Counter-Strike's elimination style gameplay where you sit out a round after you die, and he thought it'd suck. Unironically true though. But yeah, obviously it was wildly successful. It was also interesting to hear the developers talk about other games, like a small part where Jamie Griezmer discussed the sound design in Quake. Sound design is underrated in importance in video games. What's interesting is that they have mostly clips from other people talking about certain games, people who weren't the developers. So a good chunk of the section on Tribes is just the Halo developers talking about how it influenced them. It's a similar case with a lot of the other games, like Battlezone for example. It wasn't the creators talking about the game, but other people talking about their experience with it. It's likely because it was probably already enough work to get the interviews with the people that they did do. It probably would have been difficult to get a hold of some people. They also have cameos from internet personalities like G-Man Lives and the Angry Video Game Nerd. G-Man Lives actually appears at quite a few points. Realistically, it's because they needed footage to fill a certain space, and he's at least played all of these games. It would have been cool to have interviews with people from DICE or Infinity Ward talking about the creation of Call of Duty and Battlefield. I think that the documentary also has a bias towards old games. It doesn't really mention a ton post-2010 besides new Doom. There are mentions of Titanfall, Destiny, Apex Legends, and Overwatch, but they're fleeting and hardly covered. At least they go over Borderlands. So this documentary is largely focused on the first 20 years of shooters since Doom, or technically first 40 years. This isn't necessarily bad, but even if you aren't particularly a fan of these modern shooters, it still would have been interesting to hear the thoughts from some of those developers. It would have been interesting to hear someone from Destiny or Apex Legends. It does cover the boomer shooter revival in more detail than a lot of the newer shooters. It talks about Dusk, Ultrakill, and all that. Note that they do use texture filtering in some of the Doom footage. I know it's difficult when you need this much footage. I've made that mistake myself. There are some interviews I would have liked to see with relevant people like Tim Sweeney, Gabe Newell, or Jason Jones, but I certainly understand that those kinds of high-profile guests probably would have been difficult to get a hold of. So something like that is certainly not an expectation or something I'd knock the documentary down for. The music sometimes feels like generic royalty-free music. Some documentaries go above and beyond with their soundtracks and it adds to them in perhaps an under-recognized way. But at this, I think the best points with the music were when they were just using the game music, like the Doom music, for example. So, in short, yeah, I recommend the documentary. It's absolutely worth a watch if you're at all interested in first-person shooters. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.